Okay, I think we are started. So let's start. So I'm here at the very end of the workshop, just before the public lecture, with one key participant of our workshop who has been very vocal. Can you please just identify yourself at the beginning?
I'm Norah Owaraga. I think I'm a cultural anthropologist, and I come from Uganda. I'm an activist of sorts, but more of an armchair activist.
Okay, thank you. What was you were here with us for 2 days, right, at this workshop? What's the impression? How did you find the workshop?
Oh, I found it quite interesting because sometimes it's very difficult to understand what academics are saying, and the workshop was full of academics, but they were able to try and speak in ways that I now see the Arusha Declaration differently. And I see that the socialist movement actually does still exist, because rarely now do you hear of socialists sort of openly saying socialist. I began to see that socialism is not necessarily devoid of economic development per se, but it is questioning how the economic development is being done. And the first time I heard about socialist economic development, because I am so dominated with the neoliberal view, I did not even think that you can discuss socialism and talk about development at the same time. From the workshop, however, I thought that the discussions were focusing too much on the political side of things. I think the danger sometimes is to focus on political movements that are intended maybe for regime change or that are confrontational towards regimes. And I think that maybe we need to also focus on those social movements that are saying, well, if the regime is not providing the particular social services, how do we organize ourselves to provide them ourselves? How do we cut the dependency, or how do we make ourselves important so that the state comes to us and talks to us not as objects but as active voting citizens? Right now, the state feels that they can buy us because we are not relevant, because if you are going to be asking the same state to do everything for you, then you do not have active agency. So I think that social movements need not necessarily be only political. I know this was a political meeting, but I think that there is another way of mobilizing grassroots to be self-reliant and then to demand services from the state, but at an equal footing.
Okay, thank you. What were the highlights, one or two highlights perhaps you want to share with our viewers of the last 2 days? For you personally?
For me personally, to be honest, the highlight was actually to learn about ROAPE. I mean, this is a journal that is dedicated and is focusing on content from Africa. And I didn't know about it. And the highlight for me is to realize that actually ROAPE is looking to see how it can be more plugged into Africa. So I'm out there looking at how can I get published, and I'm fearing to access journals, and yet there is a journal out there thinking, how can I get more of Norah people into the journal? It was fantastic. That is a major highlight, and I go away from here absolutely positive that there will be a follow-up from my side to ROAPE, and also to borrow the concept of how the workshop has been organized, in perhaps organized at a very smaller level, 2-hour sessions, but let's come together and discuss about issues that affect our day-to-day lives. We do not need to have excessive money. We all have boardrooms, we all have learning, we are working on setting up learning centers, but let's have these discussions, and then most importantly, let's write up some of these things in a systematic way that they can be shared. So I have a blog that I publish stuff, but it has been pretty much a sole little voice coming out. I could say, ROAPE, I have this information. How do I make it more user-friendly for a wider audience and for engagement? So that is a major highlight for me. I was very suspicious coming. Who is ROAPE? I was telling Professor Lawrence that I had to investigate before I accepted the invitation, because I honestly did not know about this journal, which is focusing on African content.
Okay, fantastic. So nice. Welcome. We're happy to have you. And we wait for your blog pieces that you can publish with that on ROAPE.net. So then just two brief ones at the very end now. What was new to you, other than what you just said about ROAPE? Anything else from the discussions or from the presentations, or anything else that was new to you, or that you were not aware of before?
Well,
other than what you said earlier as well about socialism and economic development and so on. So
you see, the thing is that what is new to me is because I am not necessarily an academic. So all that theorizing stuff was quite new to me. But it was still new, even though I may sort of think that it is expected that it will be that way. I felt that people, when they were presenting their actions, the activists or the presentation, there is a pressure to try and present it in a logical theory of Marxism, of Lenin, of that. And I'm like, why is that necessary? Why can't you see my action as it is? Should we only label ourselves on the basis of the old writings? And so I found that what was new to me was the whole definition of yourself as comrade, as you had to stick to Leninism, you had to stick to Marxism, you had to sort of define yourself from those old frames. That was fairly new to me, because I take stories from the grounded theory perspective and not operating and fixing it within an existing framework. But I suppose it is good to sort of take your experience and try to fit it in a framework, or to understand it through a particular lens. Okay, finally the public lecture has started, so let me just pose my last question. You made many interventions in the workshop, but one thing I remember you said was you highlighted the importance of cultural imperialism, right? Yeah. So I wonder, where does that come from? Because you are from Uganda, right, where the NRM government and the donors, etc., are doing certain things, and you're on the grassroots, right? You have this grassroots experience as well. You're an activist. So why do you highlight the cultural imperialism? Cultural imperialism in terms of what is considered knowledge. Earlier on in the workshop, people referenced economics, and they said the informal sector. But the informal sector in Uganda, you have what they call informal education. And the largest education that a child gets from socialization from the family is the one that is considered informal and is subjugated to the formal education, which is based on the the colonial British system. And that, what is called education, is questionable, whether it is education or it is just about passing a set of exams. And so normally what is called education in Uganda doesn't allow for thinking. And so when I say cultural imperialism, is that the official language of the country, all official documents that relate to Uganda are in English. And so if you are not competent in the English language, you are automatically excluded from significant debates that affect your life. This would not happen in Europe. In UK, you would not have another language in which to engage economics. And then on top of that, then we have a dealing. We who are saying we are activists and we are leading these social movements, we are talking English with you. But the community that we say we are leading, some of the English words we are using have a different contextual meaning to them. And so we throw around these big words. In Uganda now, the big word is modernization, industrialization, fighting poverty forever. We are fighting poverty forever, you understand. And people, those are the words the president uses. And then development is defined in terms of GDP. Instead of defining, we had one of the representatives of, I believe it was IFAD, who came out and said we should stop discussing food security at household level and discuss it at national level. How do you do that? And so use of the English language can be good, that we communicate world over, but it can also be disempowering.
Okay, and is cultural imperialism a term that is widely used in Uganda to discuss things or to identify this imperialism, or?
No, sadly. It is not.
Why not?
Because culture is seen as static. It is not seen as a way of life. And so when the culture is discussed in Uganda, people are looking at art crafts, you know, baskets, dresses, hairstyles or whatever. They are not looking at institutions, social institutions, and how our belief systems are informing this. And culture is only brought in when people are disagreeing with a particular let me give an example. For example, when President Obama went off the limb and said Uganda will be targeted for approving, I think the president was going to sign off on legislation that was going to affect people who of sexual orientation, homosexuals, and you know, and so the president said that is not our way of life, that is not culture. Only when it suits them for certain reasons. Otherwise, cultural imperialism is never used as a term. The more visible imperialism is economic imperialism, political imperialism, but cultural imperialism of how it permeates through our education system, how it permeates through what we call education, how it permeates through big capital penetrating our grassroots is not discussed in that way.
And the term imperialism, economic, political, is that used widely?
That is used a lot, mostly to when the geopolitics are not favorable to the regime, you hear something about imperialism. But also it is used a lot if people criticize a particular way of doing things. And so you are not going to be imperialistic. But you see, in Uganda also there is reverse racism. And the reverse racism, which is also cultural in a way, is that there is a belief that a person of white skin is more clever than a person of dark skin. And some white people have internalized this. And the manner in which they conduct themselves, I mean, not all of them are sex offenders like the Oxfam thing, but you can begin to understand how the lifestyles and the way of interacting with the communities happens if you have a certain mindset that you are better than them educationally. And sometimes, you know, you then have concepts, which I also had in the workshop, of referencing to a group of human beings as masses. What does that mean? I mean, for me, I think that when you refer to people as masses, you have immediately devalued their human being. And you do not hear people in the UK referring to their constituents as masses. I'm not quite sure. Do they say that? So something like that. And so the colonial mentality of superiority, the hierarchy is still there. It is subtle but there.
Thank you. Enjoy the public lecture. Thank you.
You asked for the crazy stuff.